Hello, everyone. Once again, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Cafe podcast. For this podcast, we're focusing on FanDuel and their contest for tonight and their salaries. I'm your host, Big Italy 42. Once again, here with Spencer Limbach, Spencer_JL on Twitter. And you excited about tonight's slate, man? You ready to get going?
Yeah, definitely. It's a 12-game slate. Can't really beat that. Tons of great options. I mean, definitely going to have to blend in some value plays because, as we're going to talk about, there's a lot of top dollar picks and really good matchups. So the key is finding the value to complement them with.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, you're going to want to get some of those top guys, but obviously, best case scenario, you're getting two in your lineup, but you don't want to be pushing it too much on a big slate like this and forcing values in. So we're going to go ahead and start at the top here at point guard. And I'm not going to be paying a lot of these top dollar prices. We mentioned the DraftKings podcast. Steph Curry, a better price over there. A little bit of a blowout concern. 10.1K. He's a guy I'm going to be avoiding on FanDuel, and I think you're of the same thinking here.
Yep, I agree for the most part. If you're paying up, he's the guy, but you don't have to.
Exactly. We're going to get to some mid-range guys we think are better options. That's not to say we think Curry's not a good option, like Spencer said, but not necessary. We don't think to pay up for him. We've got Mo Williams at 7,400. Looks like Kyle Lowry will play tonight, but he hasn't exactly been a defensive stalwart recently. So everyone knows what Mo Williams has been doing recently. 44, 39, 41, and 37 fantasy points his last 4 games. So he's certainly a play at 7.4. Price rising, but you on board with Mo Williams here again?
Yeah, and like you said, the price is rising, but one way to look at it is that he's filling Kemba Walker's role better than Kemba Walker was previously. So would you pay 7.4K for Kemba Walker in this type of situation? The answer is probably yes. So I think he's still underpriced in that regard.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, huge role, big usage, and that's something we've been talking about recently is guys stepping in and filling roles. If it's a bench player or a new player in a situation coming in, they're not necessarily a big play, but a guy like Kemba Walker touches the ball a ton. So Mo Williams in a great spot there, using up that opportunity. We liked Isaiah Thomas quite a bit more on DraftKings, where he's 6,000. But you would also mention a great point that Avery Bradley's out, so there's going to be more shots to go for Isaiah Thomas. So not a guy that I love at 7,000 on FanDuel, but I think he's in play for tournaments given the fact that Avery Bradley will be out and someone's going to need to score the basketball.
Yeah, more of a tournament play on FanDuel, but a better cash game pick on DraftKings, as we mentioned in the other podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. One more guy I'm going to highlight here, and I'm going to let you take over some guys. I like George Hill quite a bit, 6,400 going up against Aaron Brooks in Chicago. He's the guy that's kind of been doing it all, doesn't need to score a ton of points to pay off his price tag, and that price tag, 6,400. His last few games have been similar to Steph Curry's fantasy point-wise, and you can get him for $3,700 less. Big fan of his tonight.
Yeah, I like him as well. Someone else I'm going to throw at you for the exact same price is Reggie Jackson. Matchup at Houston isn't great. Patrick Beverley is questionable, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Is that right?
Uh-huh.
So if Beverley's out, I'm going to really like Reggie Jackson. That's the only concern I have for him is Beverley's hounding defense. But this is a high-scoring game. He'll play up in pace. I think that'll help sustain some of his value, especially in the increased role at Detroit.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think he becomes one of, if not the top dollar-for-dollar price if Beverley sits, because as we know, pesky defender there. Definitely a guy that you don't usually like to target. But like you mentioned, Jackson's still in a good spot, and he's a big part of that offense right now. One other guy we have been talking about before, much better play on DraftKings, still. He's been playing very well. Jeremy Lin, he's 5,400. Obviously just a tournament play, but look at his last 3 games, 44, 45, and 34. Going against Mike Conley, but he is coming off the bench. Not a great matchup, but I think he's a guy you're going to need to consider if you have multiple tournament lineups.
Yep, I agree with both of those points.
All right. Anybody else you're liking at point guard here on FanDuel?
Not really. I was looking at Grievous Vasquez, but Kyle Lowry probable kind of kills that pick, so no one else I'm really diving down to in the bargain bin.
I'm with you there. Moving on to shooting guard, we've got James Harden, the obvious top option. Detroit, not a good defensive team. He's $11,000, and we mentioned the opportunity cost many times before. James Harden, not a must play. However, as far as the top options go, he has the best chance to crush every other player at his position. And so obviously with that 60-point upside that James Harden has, if he goes for that, you don't have him on one of your 2 shooting guard slots, you're behind the 8 ball pretty quickly there. So I think that you have the same thinking that he's the obvious top option. You're going to need some exposure, especially with multiple lineups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we kind of talked about it on the DraftKings podcast that was recorded right before this. There's not a whole lot of opportunity cost in picking him today. And you look on FanDuel, you need 2 shooting guards. I'm not in love with any of the cheap plays. We'll kind of get into some of that, but yeah, there's less opportunity cost there, and I think there's a lot of merit in locking him in your lineup. So
yeah, completely agree there. Eric Bledsoe, another guy. We mentioned it last week, mentioned it last time out. 8,900 is way too much. I know it's a good matchup, but he needs a huge score to pay off that salary, and I don't see him exceeding that by very much, even if he reaches it. So he's kind of out of play for me tonight.
I think Brandon Knight is starting to siphon some of his production. As Knight becomes more comfortable, establishes a role in Phoenix, some of his Bledsoe's production is going to leak over. So I don't know if he's worth that hefty price point.
Yeah, I agree. And it seems to me that the times you want to target Eric Bledsoe are the fast-paced games against the Golden State, Los Angeles Clippers, something like that where he can play up and pace. Brooklyn, not an ideal situation for his game style. So
the matchup looks good on paper because Brooklyn profiles, like almost dead last against shooting guards, but you take into account pace and just, things like that. Yeah, he really doesn't look worth the 8.9K on FanDuel, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think he's a little bit too pricey. Dwayne Wade's been playing well, 7,600. Another thing we mentioned on the other podcast is if Luol Deng, who's currently questionable, ends up sitting out, you've got guys like Goran Dragic, who we already mentioned. Dwayne Wade are going to see some more shots. Wade playing very well recently, so guy to definitely consider at 7,600 at a pretty weak position tonight, especially if Deng sits.
Yeah, I agree. I would rather go with Victor Oladipo for $400 less. We mentioned it on the DraftKings podcast. He is in a great situation at home, playing against the Kings, who rank 30th in fantasy points allowed to shooting guards. So playing faster pace against a faster paced team at home, close game, and especially if Luke Ridnour and Evan Fournier sit, that's more minutes, more ball handling responsibilities. He's a good pick either way, but I like him especially more if that injury news breaks in his favor.
Yeah, and I mean we saw it last game. He took over the offensive role. He took 25 shots, scored 38 real points, his career high. And I mean, even without that big performance, 5 of his last 6 games, at least 29 fantasy points. So nice, solid floor, especially considering tough matchup for Nikola Vucevic down low against DeMarcus Cousins. So someone might need to pick up some scoring there as well. Also looking at shooting guard, you're looking down a little bit further, and it just gets uglier and uglier. A guy that you wanted to mention here, right around 5K. Who you got there?
Rodney Stuckey sitting at 5.3K. It's a lot more favorable of a price tag on FanDuel than DraftKings. And like we mentioned, you have to have 2 shooting guards on FanDuel. So someone maybe to complement James Harden would be Rodney Stuckey. He only played 19 minutes last game, which I don't really see an explanation for that. I'm starting to think it was just a rotational quirk. Because he was seeing upwards of 25, at least 25, upwards of 30 minutes prior to that. And I have really no reason to believe that that's actually changing. So he's someone to consider, definitely a high upside option. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to put up a game that really hurts your team for that cheap price point.
Yeah, I completely agree there. I think he's probably the best option around the lower range there, right around the 5K. Because obviously guys like Lou Williams no longer really in play outside of a tournament with Kyle Lowry expected to play. I'm not reaching for any of these other guys. Kyle Korver, Danny Green, no thanks for those. Will Barton's an interesting tournament play, getting minutes, playing well, but tough matchup against the Spurs. We talked about it earlier. Maybe he gets some garbage time if the game gets out of hand. So at 4.7, not a great price, but I think he's a solid upside pick for your tournaments. I'm sure as hell not chasing Jason Richardson's big game. Good luck with that.
Don't
if you
do
do. I'm not doing it.
So I'm pretty interested to see his ownership percentage in tournaments. See how many people jump on that one game bandwagon. But yeah, I'm not going to be one of them.
No, not a chance. I mean, if he was minimum salary, I'd probably have him in a couple tournaments. But with that price up at 4,600, no chance. I'm not buying it. Utah, great defensive team, one of the best in the NBA right now. There's no way. He's not going to be knocking down every three-pointer he takes like he did last game.
Yeah.
Looking down deeper, the only other guy I think he's a decent cash game play, Tony Allen at 4,100. He gets solid minutes, high 20s usually, 24 fantasy points last time. Not a guy I'd really play in a tournament because he doesn't shoot a lot, doesn't score a lot, but steals, rebounds. He's a stat sheet stuffer, so I think he's a fine cash game play, but that is it for me at shooting guard. Anything else for you?
Yeah, speaking to Allen, favorable game environment for him. The Lakers play kind of helter-skelter at times with that young backcourt, and good opportunity for him to get steals, get out on the fast break is where he gets most of his production. So he's not a guy I'm actively targeting, but if you're filling out your lineup, you want to get some of these expensive guys, say Anthony Davis and James Harden, into a lineup. You come down to it, and you need a shooting guard right at that price range. He's an okay cash game filler that could give you, 23 fantasy points, and that's all you really need out of him.
Yeah, and he's the guy that always goes low owned, and for all those same reasons. I mean, he's not a sexy pick. He's not the guy that you are hoping he's going to get you 40 fantasy points, because that's never going to happen with Tony Allen. So definitely a good cash game play. Small forward, pretty straightforward up at the top. You've got LeBron James, a little bit too pricey for my taste. We've already mentioned it a couple times. James Harden seems like a better play, especially due to the opportunity cost. I like Anthony Davis more as well. We'll get to that in a minute. I think you do too. Next up after him, Draymond Green. Way too expensive for me on FanDuel. Much, much better price on DraftKings, where he's $1,100 cheaper. $8,300 is just not a price I can pay in a game that Vegas doesn't think will be close. I know he had a great game last time out. He's got a nice floor, but pass for me.
Yep, I agree with all of that.
All right. I know a guy you're liking here a little bit lower, so I'll let you go ahead and take the floor on him there at small forward.
Rudy Gay, sitting at 7.4K, a little bit cheaper. I like him more than LeBron as a per dollar pick tonight. And I'm just starting to realize that we've done this podcast, 3 times now?
Yeah. Like
last Friday, Tuesday, and now today. I think I've touted Rudy Gay every time, so I kind of look like a Rudy Gay fanboy right now. And I don't want to give the wrong message because I'm really not that, but you got to look at the opportunity here. I mean, we've already said this is projected to be one of the closer games. 1-point spread, 202 over-under, and Orlando is dead last in fantasy points allowed to small forwards. Great opportunity for him, fair price point. I think he's a solid pick in all formats.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you mentioned Orlando being last against small forwards. Regardless of that, Tobias Harris just hasn't looked like himself. So he already wasn't a very good defender, and I think the Rudy Gay will have his way with him. I mean, he's got a little bit of a size advantage. He's much more athletic. I think it's a great spot for Rudy Gay once again. So I'm now agreeing with you 3 straight times, so maybe I'm a fanboy.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention about this game that I kind of wanted to mention in the last podcast on DraftKings, but Orlando, interesting stat, since their head coaching change, they ranked dead last in pace of play. They were 5th in the league from January to February, sitting at about 100 possessions per game. Now they're 93rd, or 93 possessions per game for 30th in the league, dead last. So something to consider there, that they're playing at a slower clip. But on the other hand, you talk about the defensive efficiency, how they're just not a good defensive team. I think it kind of evens out in this situation. Obviously, you'd like to see more possessions when you have a guy like Rudy Gay or DeMarcus Cousins going against them. But, I think it's still a favorable spot. Just something to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and I think that kind of even plays into the strengths of Rudy Gay and DeMarcus Cousins, because Gay can always create his own shot. Great jump shooter. He's very athletic. And DeMarcus Cousins doesn't really matter the pace. He can dominate when it's slow pace, fast pace, doesn't matter.
Both of them are really half-court players, too. So, I mean, it's not like they're getting out on the break and that's the only way they're getting value. So, I mean, I don't think it really hurts their cause too much. Just something to be aware of maybe moving forward when you're looking at targeting players against Orlando.
Yeah, completely agree there. One other guy, he's been a pretty popular play recently. I'm not in love with him in this spot, but pretty good cash game play due to his usage in big minutes. Danilo Gallinari, 5,300. Assuming he's starting at the 2 and Wilson Chandler at the 3. That'll keep him away from Kawhi Leonard for the most part. I think he's a fine cash game play, but I'm not expecting a huge performance out of him in what is still a pretty tough matchup.
Yeah, I like him. I really like his price tag on FanDuel, 5.3K. I think that's pretty fair, given his uptick in production, like you said. The Nuggets need him to score. They really need him to take shots from the perimeter, and like you said, if Wilson Chandler's locked down by Leonard, he's going to be the guy to do it. So, yeah, he's someone I feel okay with at that price range if you're looking for your second small forward pick.
Yeah, absolutely. One other interesting play here. He's a small forward here on FanDuel, a power forward on DraftKings. We didn't mention him in the first one, but especially with Avery Bradley out there, there'll be more shots to go around. Jay Crowder, 4,900, going against a Pelicans team that has not been good against the 3 this year, assuming he plays more time at the 3 tonight, which I would think that he would. He doesn't stand much of a chance against Anthony Davis down low, but he's a guy who he's had a couple big scoring games, had a couple nice rebounding totals, and 5 of his last 7 games, 27 or more fantasy points. So I think if you're reaching down low, I don't think he's that bad of a play. He's got a pretty safe floor.
Yeah, it's interesting with him because I thought his run was going to be over last game with Kelly Olynyk returning because they had him playing the 4 quite a bit in some smaller rotations with Kelly Olynyk injured. But he actually played 33 minutes and put up 28 fantasy points. So to me, that signals that Brad Stevens likes him and likes to play him minutes when he can. And he likes to go on small ball at times. And like you said, they could squeeze him into the small forward position, put Evan Turner over to the 2, and get him minutes that way also. So, yeah, keep him on your radar.
Yeah, absolutely. The rest of small forward isn't very pretty. You've got Al-Farouq Aminu, not a cash game play, not a guy that I'm in love with at 4,600. I think he's an okay play if you're reaching low, but I'd probably rather pay a little bit more for Jay Crowder. Iguodala is a guy that's been playing well, but his price at 5K is a little much for me for a guy that doesn't really have any upside. Anybody else you're looking at here cheap?
Nope, that's it.
All right, fair enough. Moving on to power forward, we already kind of touched on this. Anthony Davis, the best spot of the night of any power forward, and I don't think it's particularly close. You mentioned Boston's front court, pretty weak. You've got Kelly Olynyk, not a good defender. You've got Brandon Bass, also not a good defender. Tyler Zeller, just LOL to Tyler Zeller if he ends up trying to match up on Anthony Davis. So the only thing that will stop Anthony Davis tonight is Anthony Davis, because coming off of an enormous performance, one of his best of his career off an injury, 78.6 fantasy points on FanDuel. 11.2 is an expensive price tag, but his matchup and his upside are second to none at power forward tonight.
Yeah, I love him in this matchup, especially at home, where he has higher splits per this season and his career. It's really a great spot, and I like, but I'm not in love with any of the mid-range or mid-upper tier power forwards. So you could complement Davis with a cheap pick, as we're going to get to soon here, and go that route. And I mean, that's probably what I'm going to do in majority of my cash games here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're on the same thinking of the 2 guys we're going to end up having in our cash games. So we'll, like you said, we'll get to that in a minute. Looking at the other high-priced players, Pau Gasol, 9,500, a little bit much for me in a slow-paced game against Indiana. David West, a decent defender. I'm not exactly expecting to stop him, but I think it's going to be hard for him to pay off that price tag. You had mentioned Zach Randolph on DraftKings. Much better price tag there. Yeah. 8,300 here is a little much, especially with the blowout risk, despite a great matchup. I'm a fan of Paul Millsap a lot more on FanDuel than I am on DraftKings. I do kind of like him in both places. Great matchup against Kevin Love. Should be a close game. Big game for playoff seeding with Atlanta and Cleveland. And at 7,500, I think he makes for a very nice play. Probably the B option for me at power forward here on FanDuel.
Yeah, I really like that play. I would categorize him in the same spot as Greg Monroe in terms of matchup and predicted raw fantasy total. But he's $500 cheaper on FanDuel. So, I mean, with all things considered, if you have a tie like that, always go with the cheaper pick. And that's Millsap. In this game, like you said, primetime matchup, good game, and it should be a close one. So, I mean, the starters will see time down the stretch. So,
yeah. Next thing I want to touch on here, Terrence Jones, and this is important for two reasons. If he plays, I think he's a great play against Detroit, who's weak down low. He's got elite upside, I think, at 6,700 with the blocks, the steals. He kind of does it all there. However, if he's unable to go, then we're looking once again at Donatas Motiejunas, who is very fairly priced at 5,100. I think he would be a great plug-and-play there. I won't be playing him. I think you have the same thinking if Terrence Jones does play. But one of those two will definitely be on my radar tonight, depending on the status.
absolutely. And like you mentioned with Terrence Jones, much better price tag on FanDuel. He's 6.7K there, and he's 7K on DraftKings. So if you consider where that sits in terms of compared to the average roster spot, that's really favorable tag on FanDuel. And his teammate Josh Smith is also someone to consider, sitting at 6.4K if Terrence Jones misses this game. You could go in that direction just as easily. But if that's the case, Motiejunas, he's really cheap, and he could put out some similar output like Josh Smith tonight. So I think that's definitely a route to consider.
Yeah, and I mean, we kind of touched on it. We'll briefly go over it again. Once again, the narrative there, the revenge game for Josh Smith. Maybe he shows up just a little bit more for his team there. But if he's coming off the bench, 12-game slate, I'm not playing him at 6,400 if Terrence Jones is in.
Mm-hmm.
Another popular play, not in a great spot. I think I like him a little more than you do. Kenneth Faried, 6,100 is priced up just a little bit. I believe it was 58 last time. Finally getting minutes. I hope this is a sign of things to come, but we've seen it before with Denver. Kind of unpredictable. Luckily, Brian Shaw and all of his circus is out of town now, so maybe we see some consistency here. Maybe Kenneth Faried ends up paying off, but at the same time, he will be a pretty popular play, I'd imagine, tonight. So maybe a guy you kind of stay away from in big tournaments.
Yeah, I just don't know if I like him that much. I mean, there's the blowout factor. He's had 2 straight good games, solid production, good minutes with the new coach. I mean, it looks like that's a sign of things to come, but we just don't know. His price tag is a little bit risen. The matchup is okay, but it's the Spurs. I don't know if I'm going to go that route tonight.
Yeah, a lot of negatives there potentially. So I mean, he's a guy that you could take a shot with. He's got significant upside, but he also doesn't have a very high floor. So you're definitely taking on some risk with him. And now we move on to the obvious play of the night, and do us and yourself and everyone else a favor and play Nikola Mirotic in your games on FanDuel. Yep. 4,500 has to be either a mistake or just a free gift from FanDuel for everyone tonight, because even last night on the 2-game slate, his price, I believe, was 4,700 or 4,800, a little bit more expensive. Don't quote me on that, but either way, under 5K for a guy with 39, 32, and 40 fantasy points, over 31 minutes each of those games. He's an obvious play tonight. Even if he doesn't reach that level, you don't need anywhere near that. He could crush his value tonight, and I think you're on board with this one here.
Yeah, if you have him, you have to have him in your cash games at least, and I think there's merit to just lock him in tournaments too, because he provides much needed salary cap relief, especially if you're trying to reach up to Davis or Harden. But yeah, not a great matchup, but who cares? I mean, lock him in at this price point. Like you said, it's a gift. It's you got to look for those pricing quirks. I know we had one the other day. Mo Williams was like 6,200 after being like 6,600 the night before, and he had 40 fantasy points that night. So, I mean, you just have to take advantage of what they give you like that, and this is one of them.
Yeah, this is one of those scenarios. That's like one of the first things I do every day, and I think you do as well. Look through all of the salaries, both the main sites. Any site you're playing on, really look for a discrepancy, a guy you think is underpriced compared to what his value threshold is. And, I mean, Mirotic, the obvious play there tonight.
But one thing, I think this is the appropriate time to bring this up. You see a lot of columns out there. A lot of people write up plays, just general plays of who they like at every position. And you'll see them, power forward, Nikola Mirotic, will be listed there more times than not probably today. It's important to really be price sensitive when you look at those picks, because one person could be looking at FanDuel, say Mirotic is an absolute must play. Then again, on DraftKings, he's 5.7K. That's a little more steep of a price tag. So I mean, they may not have that sight in mind when recommending that play. So it's best to weigh your options and act accordingly. I mean, not just kind of tail picks like that.
Yeah, and I completely agree. That's a very great point and a really underrated aspect of your daily research, especially you mentioned that $1,200 could make a significant difference for you on DraftKings even. I mean, that could be the difference between you getting yourself a mid-range point guard or bumping up to a better point guard, or going with a punt play shooting guard or moving up to a mid-range guy. So that amount of salary is a significant amount sometimes. So definitely great point there. You gotta monitor that as you move forward and while you build your lineups.
Yep.
Moving on here to center, the top option once again, DeMarcus Cousins, 10,600. We mentioned he is only 9,500 on DraftKings, so this is another perfect scenario here where still not a must play on DraftKings, of course, with other options. However, by far, dollar for dollar, if you're looking at the top tier of centers, he's the best play there against Orlando. Still in play here on FanDuel at 10.6, but more of a tournament guy for me at that price. Is he a guy you're considering your cash games? Because for me, there's one guy, and I think it's the same guy you're looking at that we're looking at for our cash games.
Yeah, I mean, I would just have Cousins for a tournament pick probably, and then probably lock him in more so on DraftKings.
Yeah, completely agree. And like we already mentioned, if you're paying 10+ K for players, especially on FanDuel tonight, it looks like James Harden, Anthony Davis are the plays, especially due to the opportunity cost of their positions. Moving down a little bit further, I think Rudy Gobert, my favorite play. I think he's yours as well, 7,500. The matchups don't get any better than this for centers. We saw the inconsistent Roy Hibbert have a huge game against this same Philly front court a couple of games ago, and Rudy Gobert, much more athletic. And, I mean, he has just an insane amount of upside, and a 7-point spread here isn't that bad. So if Philly keeps this one close, which they did against OKC the other day, surprisingly, and a much bigger spread, I think Rudy Gobert could be in line for dollar by far the best play tonight.
Yeah, and this is played at Philadelphia. If it was at Utah, I'd be very concerned with the blowout factor. So, I mean, that really helps the Gobert's cause because it could keep the game closer. A lot of people are going to look at this over-under. It's at 182, and they're probably going to be pretty turned off of this game. I think that's a mistake when it comes to Gobert. We said it the other day. He derives his value from rebounds, blocks. I mean, things that really don't add up to the cumulative total of the game. I mean, that don't factor into the over-under. So I really wouldn't be concerned about that great matchup, like you said. But, I mean, he doesn't even need a great matchup to hit value. So he's a great pick, even for a pretty increased price tag if you're looking at where it was a week ago. So I would still lock him in at 7.5K in all formats.
Yeah, I completely agree there. And, I mean, just to further your point there, you look at his actual point totals, 10, 15, 12, 10, and 16 over his last 5, but 39, 44, 30, 30, and 42 fantasy points. So just keep that in mind. If for some reason he does have a big offensive game, which if there was ever a spot, this is the one. I mean, he could just – I mean, his ceiling is immense here is what we're trying to say here. As far as other plays, you've got Al Jefferson at 8,100. I don't love that price for him. It's a fine matchup, but I don't think I'll be paying that. Got Marcus Gasol, still underpriced, but the blowout risk there, 7,700. I think he's a fine play if that game stays close, but that's kind of hard to predict at this point, so I think I'll stick with Gobert. A guy I really like in tournaments, still playing well, Joakim Noah, 7,200. Did play last night, but seems like he's in fine shape, and you look at his logs recently, the guy doesn't need to score or even shoot the ball to pay off his tag, so I think he's got some nice upside, some triple-double upside there.
I just don't like him playing down in pace. Indiana really crowds around the rim, and I don't know. I mean, I'd rather go Gobert there, and I think you would as well. But yeah,
bump it down a little bit more. Not many options. I'm even considering. There's two guys I'll consider a little bit. Marcin Gortat, 5,500, a much better price here on FanDuel than on DraftKings. But you don't really like the matchup against Hassan Whiteside, who is just a freak down low. So especially considering Gortat's not much of a scorer. A lot of his values derive from rebounds, and you got to think those numbers are going to be down tonight against Whiteside. So more of a tournament guy for me, but at the same time, not a lot of upside. So I think that Gortat, you still like the price, but he's kind of on that fence where you might want to get some exposure because he's cheap, but at the same time, I'm not going to force him in any of my lineups.
Yeah, he's one of those cash game fillers, kind of like I mentioned before with Rodney Stuckey, where you're filling out your lineup, you love it, you come down to center, it's your last pick, and you need someone in the 5,800, 5,500 range. Gortat's just sitting there.
Yep.
I mean that's where you're going with Gortat tonight because he is underpriced. I mean he's been doing really good as of late, and his price tag hasn't moved. I mean that's another one of those pricing quirks over at FanDuel. So he has merit in that regard, but not someone to actively target.
Yeah, absolutely. Only other guy we're really looking at here, we mentioned him on the other podcast. Alex Lynn is 5K. We mentioned that actually this is the point that you made that down low, it's a great matchup for Lynn because the Brooklyn bigs, they take jump shots. The way their offense runs, they're not always crowding the basket, so there should be more rebounds for him, less chance for foul trouble, which killed him last time, which is another thing that you pointed out in your article the other day, to be careful there. So I think that concern is gone, and if you look at his game log, it might kind of scare you, but I mean, it shouldn't because it's a good matchup. He's 5K, and due to foul trouble, he's never gotten the flow of things last game.
And he's going to have a very low ownership percentage because a lot of people got burned last time with that dud performance. So if you want to lock him in, I mean, probably not for cash games as much. He's still an okay pick considering the price for cash games if you're able to configure your lineup accordingly. But especially in tournaments, I think he's a great pick to crush value tonight and allows you to reach up to Davis, Harden, and then stack your lineup with like Oladipo alongside Harden and some other high upside plays. So I really like that pick if you're going salary cap relief at the center position.
Yeah, but it seems like the theme here is we still both like Gobert.
Gobert is, yes.
Yeah,
I'm going to make myself clear that Gobert is the pick, not Alex Len. But if you're diving to that range, Alex Len's the guy to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that wraps it up for us here. Check out our other podcast if you are playing on DraftKings. Obviously, this one FanDuel specific. But if not, check out our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com. And thanks for hanging out with us. We will see you guys again next time.